All right, we're here with author, travel show host, all around good guy Rick Steves. Thanks for joining us on this inaugural Seattle Hempfest online event.
Thank you, Stacy. The show must go on.
That's right. Tell you, that's one thing about people. We're an imaginative bunch, especially people of the cannabis variety. That's for sure. All right. Well, a lot of us with Hempfest are aware of all your work and help with Hempfest, for that matter, towards drug policy reform and cannabis reform in particular. What was it that inspired you to speak out against cannabis prohibition?
I've been really fascinated by this for some reason. I don't know, for 20 or more years. I was on Jim French's show on Cairo AM way back in the 80s with a pseudonym, talking about responsible adult use. I just think it's a big lie to treat marijuana like it's going to be abused. Now, I'm not your obvious proponent for legalizing marijuana, and that's part of my that's sort of what gives me an advantage when it comes to talking to people who are afraid of marijuana.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a leader in my church. I'm got friends here in Rotary. I'm a part of my business community in Edmonds. I employ 100 people. And I'm going all over the country, spending a lot of time and a lot of money trying to legalize marijuana. And it's not because I'm pro-pot. I'm pro-civil liberties, and I'm anti-prohibition, and I'm anti-racism, and I'm pro-respect for law and order, and I don't like big, thriving black markets in empowering and enriching gangs and organized crime. I think we should legalize them, regulate them, tax the heck out of them, and let us recognize our civil liberty as mature adults to enjoy smoking marijuana if we want to. So I always start my talks by saying, I'm not pro-pot, I'm pro-civil liberties, and I think, I always say, in my talks, I always say I'm a tax-raising kid. What do I say? I say I'm a tax-paying, kid-raising, church-going, hard-working citizen of the United States of America. And if I work hard all day long and I want to go home and smoke a joint and just stare at the fireplace, that's my civil liberty. And I firmly believe it's my civil liberty. I don't think I should be able to smoke and drive while impaired. In fact, if I drive while impaired by anything, I think they should throw the book at me. There's a lot of limits, but I'm just all over civil liberties. And, Stacy, I bring a European sensibility to this. So a lot of times I can just blame my European friends. But of course, in Europe, a joint is about as exciting as a can of beer. And for even today in our country, we're arresting 600,000 people. They're not, rich white guys. They're poor people and people of color. In Europe, that would just be unthinkable. We got tens of thousands of people doing hard time for nonviolent marijuana offenses in our country, and this has just got to stop. So I bring a European sensibility to this discussion where they're more into pragmatic harm reduction instead of legislating morality and incarceration. And I also go around the country, as I'm doing right now, by the way, during this election season, and help other states legalize like Washington did. And I can speak with some credibility and authority because I was a leading funder and spokesperson and co-sponsor of our I-502 bill, which was groundbreaking along with Colorado. Washington State was the first state to legalize, tax, and regulate marijuana back in 2012. And now we have a track record. 8 years later, I can go to a state and say, our governor was not in favor of this when we managed to legalize 8 years ago, but now he understands that use doesn't go up, teen use actually goes down, road safety stays the same, and we've replaced the thriving black market that at one time rivaled apples with a highly regulated, highly taxed legal market. And now $1 billion black market industry has become $1 billion highly regulated and taxed industry, employing all sorts of people in rural corners of our states where the employment's needed, and generating $400 million a year of tax revenue for Olympia. That's hard to argue against. That's hard to argue.
More important during the pandemic than anything is this is one industry that is continuing to generate large amounts of tax dollars for the state.
Yeah.
And that is fantastic. I think another one of the great benefits of I-502 is access and how it has allowed everyone to be able to access cannabis. I tell you, I have got family in Eastern Washington that back when I was a teenager tried to bust me for cannabis. Now they're calling me up and asking me about What about those mints? Some of the ladies at the ladies club are trying these mints. Can you recommend some to me? That's stunning how far we've come, and that's a wonderful thing. And so back to Washington and Colorado. So we're the first states to legalize. Washington is still the only state that does not allow some form of home grow. And it seems that attempts to amend Washington's law have not been as effective as we kind of thought they would be when 502 passed. We sort of thought, well, we'll fix some of those things later on.
Yeah.
So what do you think the state's biggest issues in the post 502 world are? And what sort of strategies do you think we should implement to change some of those state laws?
Stacy, I'm not an insider or a wonk about Washington state policy, but I do know that in our country, states are considered incubators of change. And if there's a federal prohibition, the federal government's not going to say, sorry, we screwed up. It's up to the states to take it down one state at a time. That's how we got rid of the prohibition against alcohol back in the 1930s. That's how we're doing it against marijuana now in this decade. And in 2012, it was scary, and we just wanted to get this thing passed. We wanted to stop locking up pot smokers, and we needed to be very conservative and not overreach and scare people that were disinclined to vote for this. So we did a good job of winning. And then every 2 years, states are modifying the laws, and now the states are much smarter with their laws. And I just got to remind people it's incremental. So we were careful not to overreach back then, and then, so we didn't have home grow, we didn't have public lounges, we didn't talk about expungement. All of those things are being worked on now in different states, and thankfully so. I would remind people that this is just a real serious problem, as we're learning right now in this political season. Republicans are really not in favor of democracy. They're in favor of holding on to power by any trick they can. And when it comes to marijuana, time and time again, we pass a law, it's clearly the people's will. And then I'm sorry to politicize this, but it's not the Democrats, it's the Republicans that always do what they can with little tricks and little, just whatever they can to derail the people's will after the vote is done. So we spend a lot of money and a lot of time with Marijuana Policy Project, NORML, ACLU, in states after the people have said clearly, we want to legalize, tax, and regulate the responsible adult use of marijuana in our state. And the Republican legislators do what they can to, sidetrack it and stall it and overturn it. And it's just really frustrating. So it is an ongoing battle, and it takes money, and it takes diligence, and it takes patience. But I look at this not just as a Washingtonian. I look at this as an American citizen. We have a real ugly schizophrenic mess right now. In 33 states, legal marijuana for medicinal marijuana is totally legal. In 11 states now, adult recreational use is legal. My hunch is 4 more states are going to pass it in this election: Montana, South Dakota, Arizona, and New Jersey. I'm working in all these states. I'm dedicating 10 days right now, just full time, to raising awareness on a publicity campaign, just sort of a media blitz in these 4 states. Normally, every 2 years, I go on the campaign trail. 2012, I was in Washington, of course. 2014, I was in Oregon. 2016, I was in Massachusetts and Maine. 2018, I was in Illinois and Michigan. I'm learning a lot about our country over this period. And then this year, if it was normal times, I'd be in Montana or South Dakota, Arizona, New Jersey. I don't know, a couple of those states, but I can't, obviously, with COVID. So I'm here at home with sort of a publicity war room here, and I'm on radio and TV and in newspapers and so on in all these states, as I'm working with the Marijuana Policy Project and NORML, for which I'm a board member, to get it passed in these states. So it's a constant battle. We're almost there, but we just still need to be fighting this. It's so amazing to me that, recreational marijuana is almost part of tourism in Colorado and Washington state, and you can do hard time for it in the state just over the border. And that indicates that there's a rising tide of sensibility on this issue, and it's just a matter of time before we're not going to be having to do these battles every 2 years. But, we're up against a regressive, anti-democratic force with these Republicans.
Right. And it is very hypocritical of a party that has talked about states' rights for so long to just go and do these things in the face of such popular votes. it's just stunning. So let's talk about these 4 states. We've got Montana, South Dakota, Arizona, New Jersey. They've all got measures on their ballots.
Right.
3 of those are pretty conservative states. So you're saying you think they're going to pass, huh?
Yeah, Stacy, the polling looks really good, and what I really enjoy is going to conservative areas. I thoroughly enjoyed talking to conservative groups in Eastern Washington and in Eastern Oregon also. And I can frame this. You give me a curious, honest right-winger, a regressive person when it comes to drug policy with an attention span and an interest in what is pragmatic. Why on earth, when a veteran is suffering from PTSD, would you deny him or her the right to use cannabis to calm their nerves if it works better than opioids? Well, why? Is because pharmaceutical companies would rather not that be an option and sell them an opioid. That's addictive and very profitable, but not in the interest of that struggling veteran. So we can talk about that in these states. One thing, Stacy, I do very carefully when I'm giving my talk is to remind people this is not pro-pot. In fact, honestly, I wouldn't support a pro-pot law. These are public safety laws. These are pragmatic harm reduction laws. These are civil liberties laws. For instance, I think when you legalize marijuana in a state, employers should be able to have whatever rights they want in their workplace. And you could disagree with that, but I think there's a lot of people that are concerned about that. And I'm willing to compromise. And I think it's reasonable for a society to want to have assurances that people are not going to show up stoned at work. So I say, yeah, right into the law. Employers have all the rights they need in their workplace. There's all sorts of laws about protecting children from getting this, and people are nervous about teen use. And I like to say we've got the track record now. Teen use will not go up. A lot of people are concerned about, well, we don't like a federal prohibition, but we also don't want to have marijuana in our town. Well, I say that in every state now, you have jurisdictions, counties and towns that can vote to not have legal sale of marijuana in their county. Do I agree with that? Actually, yes. I think a county or a town should be able to say, no, we don't want this or that. But I can appeal to the libertarian sensibilities in a place like South Dakota or Montana by saying, do you want a federal prohibition to dictate all 50 states, or would you rather have the states' rights? To this day, there are counties that are dry, dating all the way back to prohibition. It seems kind of silly to me, but if you want to have your county where you can't buy alcohol legally, that's how this system works. So, you have to frame it so that this is easy to embrace in a conservative state. And I find it's fun and easy to sell the wisdom of legalizing, taxing and regulating marijuana. You notice we don't just say legalize pot, it's legalize, tax, and regulate pot.
Right.
Acknowledging it's a drug, it can be abused, but it should be treated as a soft drug like alcohol or tobacco. To be able to do that, I think gets people's attention, and they kind of go, oh, okay. And then I nail them with that whole idea that, you can't wish marijuana away. Most of the arguments against us, and I'm up against these guys that are hired by the pharmaceutical industry to debate me and so on. Almost all of their objections to legalizing marijuana assume use will go up. And I make it really clear, there's not a reservoir of good citizens in your state who would love to ruin their life smoking pot if only it was legal. Yeah. It's 2020. Anybody who wants to smoke pot does. If you legalize it tomorrow, a few people might say, oh, now I can try it. And they're probably not going to enjoy it much anyways. And it's just going to settle it down about the same. The big difference is you can take your bong out of the closet and you can put it on your shelf. You don't need to embrace this lie. You can recognize and embrace this civil liberty and be a good citizen in your state. You can enjoy marijuana as you have been anyways, without being a two-bit criminal. You're an American and you have that civil liberty. And our challenge is to get that news across and to remind people we do have a track record. When you legalize, it's so clear. Jay Inslee did not support this in 2012. Now he does. He's not arresting 10,000 people a year. He used to have $1 billion black market that rivaled Apple's, empowering and enriching gangs and organized crime. And now that black market has been decimated, and we've got a thriving legal market. It's $1 billion legal market, employing a lot of people and generating $400 million a year, earmarked for health projects and education and drug awareness programs. And what's not to like about it, you know? And I like the fact that I can buy my marijuana in a nice little tube, and it says exactly what it is and when it was packaged and so on. That we didn't get before. So there's a lot of good reasons to celebrate what we've done in Washington State. Sure, you can complain about stuff, but we've come a long way in the last few years, and we have been a leader in this country in bringing down the prohibition of our age.
Yeah, I remember, Rick, years ago, Norm Stamper telling me that marijuana laws drive such a wedge between law enforcement and the average citizens. And I'd have to admit, you know, the only reason I was ever afraid of an encounter with an officer was because I was holding a little cannabis on me. And so, yeah, it can do a lot to mend a lot of rifts in this country. And again, it's a total civil rights issue. And,
you know, Stacy, Norm Stamper is a great guy, and I believe he's a member of what used to be called LEAP. It has a different name, but Law Enforcement Against Prohibition. And this was lawyers and judges and so on and cops that favored ending the prohibition. They're not pro-pot, that's for sure. They just think it's a stupid law. Sadly, LEAP it's a great organization, and it should be called Retired Law Enforcement Against Prohibition, because it's just when people retire, then they can talk about it. You see, they think it when they're still employed, but they can't risk giving up their employment. But when they retire, then they can talk candidly about what a mess this status quo is.
Yeah, and it really I mean, you're in my mind, you represent 90% of cannabis users. You're a productive member of society. You're participating in your community. You're not doing anybody any harm. And it's silly. It's just silly for any of us to have to live in fear of incarceration over something we do that is far less dangerous to the community at large than alcohol or tobacco.
And it's messing up a lot of good lives. It's messing up a lot of lives. And again, they're not people whose rich daddy can get them out of trouble. These are people who they hit a bump in the road and they can't get a loan. They can't get into school. They can't get housing. They can't get a job. And then they become angry. It's a tragedy. And I just wish that people who have just drunk the reefer madness Kool-Aid could understand that we've been embracing a lie that goes back generations. And a milestone in that whole thing, as those of us who are aficionados of this struggle know, was 1971 when President Nixon decided to stick marijuana right in there with heroin and LSD and so on. Why did he do that? Because it deserves to be Schedule I, or was he just trying to penalize the hippies, and that was their favorite weed and they opposed his Vietnam War? He was just doing something to get back at the hippies. And today, 50 years later, we're saddled with a law that's based on lies, and we've got a lot of money going into it. And you know, every 2 years I'm on the campaign trail and I'm up against people that debate me and they counter me and so on. And they don't believe what they're saying. I'm convinced they don't believe what they're saying. They are hired hands to make the point of a publicity firm that's hired by some big corporation. And that corporation is what I've called, I've coined this little phrase. I think it's really clever. Nobody else uses it, but I like it. It's the PPP, the Pot Prohibition Profiteers. Who spends the money to advertise against legalizing marijuana? Not people that care about society. It's the PPP, the people who make money if we keep marijuana illegal. And who is that mostly? It's pharmaceuticals, because they don't want you to be able to buy a nice little jar of marijuana for medicinal purposes or whatever. They want you to have to buy a bottle of medicine that costs a lot more, and it gets you into harder stuff. It's too bad. So I'm up against these people, and they're getting paid to oppose me, and I'm paying my own plane ticket to get there, and I'm giving my own time to do it because it's sort of a civic duty for me. I just think I have the experience. I can just blame my European friends. Nobody needs to vote for me. Nobody can fire me. Every once in a while, somebody says, Rick Steves, we know what you think about marijuana. We're not going to take your tours, and we're not going to read your Europe guidebooks anymore. And all I can think is Europe's going to be a lot more fun without you.
Boy, you got that right. Yeah, there's no secret agenda on part of the vast international cannabis cabal
Right.
that you're representing. I love that.
Yeah.
So so here we are. We've got this patchwork of laws. Some of them are good, some of them are not as good, all across the country.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts about federal legalization and what it might be able to do about that?
Well, I mentioned right now it's a schizophrenic mess. And I was really inspired by Mayor LaGuardia in New York City, who back in the 1930s, when the discussion was prohibition against alcohol, he said, when a society has a law on the board that it doesn't intend to enforce consistently across the board, the very existence of that law erodes respect for law enforcement in general. Well, that was the case in the 30s when you had organized crime and all sorts of violence and dirty money and so on behind alcohol. And they realized back then that the law that was designed to protect us from the abuse of this drug was actually causing more heartache than the drug itself. And when they re-legalized alcohol, I don't think they were saying booze is good. I just think they were saying to legislate this morality makes no sense at all. Well, we're in the same situation right now. So we've got a situation again where it's one state at a time. We took down prohibition that way. First it was New York and then other states. First it was beer, and then it was hard liquor, and then it was home brewing, and so it's incremental. And I'm all for that because, there's a lot of frightened people. Those of us who know cannabis, we don't think it's that frightening. But for a lot of people, it is frightening, and I have to respect that. There is going to reach a point when the federal government is going to wake up and see there's a rising tide of sensibility in our country, and that this prohibition has just got to go. And that's almost here now. There is an act called the MORE Act that the House of Representatives is ready to vote on. And this, it doesn't legalize marijuana, but it deschedules it. And then it lets each state, it will honor what each state does, and it opens the door for expungement, letting people who have done their time for marijuana, who have been arrested and now have a record, to, if it's a nonviolent marijuana offense, to get that off of their record and clean that up. It's a beautiful law. And legislators were going to do it this season, but they just decided, no, they don't want to do it in an election time. And especially in other states, it's dicey to be public about your support of ending the prohibition against marijuana. So they're going to deal with the MORE Act after the inauguration of the next president. And that could be the beginning of a lot of progress at the federal level. So we are making progress. It takes time, it takes diligence. I'd like to remind anybody who's viewing us now and celebrating, I've been going to Hempfest for years and years and years, and it's a celebration of civil liberties, but I am a little disappointed in people who complain and everything that don't realize we live in a democracy. We have a social contract where we have to give and take a little bit so we can all live together. And we need to educate the people who are in our opposition. And you do that politically, you do that constructively. And we've got organizations. Of course, I'm a member of NORML, and I'm so inspired by these inside marijuana policy wonks that are dedicating their careers. These are lawyers. These are people that could make big bucks elsewhere, but they're dedicating their careers to an ideal, to a principle. Civil liberties. They're, some of them love marijuana. Some of them have nothing to do with marijuana. They just think it's a racist, counterproductive law, and they're dedicating their careers to civil liberties. If you agree with that, it's important to actually support them. You can support them by being an advocate with your neighborhood, with public events. You can do that by supporting them financially. It takes a lot of money to run these programs. I've been donating money for a long time to these organizations. And for me, it's a real good way to get some traction out of my philanthropic dollar. If you really care about the racist, the Jim Crow dimension to this, if you really care about the civil liberties of this, if you really care about the opioid problem, I mean, there's a lot of reasons to support legalizing smartly marijuana. I would remind you, Stacy, that in Europe, they've got a very interesting approach to marijuana. And the two most liberal states in Europe, when it comes to marijuana, the Netherlands and Portugal, they started their policies about marijuana that are so liberal and easy and progressive because they had a terrible opioid problem in their country. And now, decades later, they've realized that is smart policy. get marijuana out of the equation, and deal credibly with the hard drug problem, which really is a tragedy in that society. In so much of Europe, the word for addicted is enslaved. You see, we call people who are addicted to hard drugs addicts. It's sort of like they're bad. They need lawyers and cops and judges and prison. And in Europe, they're enslaved people. It's a health challenge. They need compassion. They need the government to be their friend. They need counselors and nurses. And that's what happens in compassionate, more pragmatic harm reduction societies in Europe. And consequently, they have far fewer opioid overdose deaths. I mean, almost none. In America, we're losing as many people to opioid deaths as we lost in Vietnam. So it's all tangled up together. And we just need to be smart about this. We need to work together, and we need to be patient. So, we're doing that. Hempfest is a way to celebrate the whole cannabis culture, and it should be a springboard for helping our country come to its senses when it comes to this mindless war against marijuana, which is this prohibition of our age. It was directly because of an advertising campaign that confused people, funded by people who make a lot of money by providing opioids to our citizenry. Another frustration, as I mentioned, is Republicans who are showing that they don't really understand or believe or embrace in civil liberties and democracy, and they do what they can to derail these issues. In Florida, we know about how the citizenry there voted 70%, I think, to let ex-felons who've done their time for being in jail, most of them after having marijuana convictions, should be able to vote. And they decided, no, I guess not. So, we have that struggle ongoing. What excites me most is we have a track record now. It's so much easier for me to go to different states and explain, as I mentioned, general use stays about the same. Teen use actually goes down. It's harder to get marijuana after you've legalized. The Children's Alliance actually debated and heartily endorsed our I-502 campaign. 100 organizations in our state whose mission is to look out for the well-being and safety of young people. They endorsed legalizing marijuana because they know the most dangerous thing about marijuana for a teenager is to get caught with a joint in your pocket. That's what's dangerous about marijuana. So now it's harder for kids to get. I get carded when I go into a marijuana retail outlet. So I haven't been carded for 30 years, but those are very, very ship-shape kind of operations, and they do that. They have to have 100% compliance, not just with their relationships with the government, but so they can have access to banking. So that's an interesting point. And from a teenager's point of view, it's just no longer sexy. I mean, grandma's rubbing it on her elbows. It's just
Right.
it's just not that interesting. And I always tell people, I look out at my little community here, Edmonds, and it just looks like Andy of Mayberry, and there's just a marijuana shop on the road as you drive into town. It's old news. That's the interesting thing. It's old news. Once you come to your senses, then you legalize. I think I know Joe Biden is not great when it comes to drug policy, but I think he's evolving on it. I'd far prefer him, even apart from other issues. And Kamala Harris is quite good on pot. So I'm hoping that we can get a government that is a little more modern in its view about pragmatic harm reduction and taking the crime out of the equation and recognizing the civil liberties of people who might want to enjoy marijuana as an adult. Again, we're not going to legalize it by saying pro-pot. I mean, you could, if just the gang at Hempfest was voting, that would work really well. But that's not the electorate. And we have to respect the fears and concerns of people out in the suburbs that just don't even like the smell of marijuana. And we can allay those fears if we cut back on the Cheech and Chong jokes and talk common sense, talk public safety, talk fiscal responsibility, talk respect for law enforcement, talk anti-racism, and of course for me, I'm always talking civil liberties. So for me, Hempfest is a celebration of civil liberties, even more fundamentally than a celebration of cannabis. This is what civil liberties are all about. And for me, that's what you'd like to think America is all about.
Yeah, couldn't agree with you more on that. Thank you for saying that. That sums it up for me really well.
Stacy, one thing I might remind people, I'm working really hard in these 4 states right now, Montana, South Dakota, Arizona, New Jersey. And I've got a landing page on my website. It's, ricksteves.com is my regular business website, and then /marijuana. And there you can see all of our interviews, a lot of videos, editorials that I've written, and so on. And there's just some fun stuff there. So if you're curious about the behind, the sort of the insider's look at how we're legalizing marijuana across the country and how we're taking apart this prohibition one state at a time, you might want to check out Rick Steves /marijuana, because there's a lot of good information there.
Excellent. I'll be sure to do that myself. All right. Well, thank you so much for your time. And
nice talking to you, Stacy. Yeah. And as I like to say, happy travels, even if we're all just staying home for a while.
That's right. Happy travels on the couch in front of Netflix. That's for sure. Yeah, but thank you again, Rick, for all your work, all your help. I mean, you really are a great face in this movement, and you've contributed a lot. I'm sure we haven't seen the last of you on cannabis reform, for sure.
I'm in this for the long haul, and I'm proud to be a Washingtonian. We, along with Colorado, were the first entity anywhere to deal with the Dutch called the gray area, that whole backside, distribution, wholesaling, and so on. We figured it out. It wasn't perfect, but we were the ones that broke through, and now we're well on the way to ending the prohibition against marijuana.
Oh yeah, Rick, once those 2 states kick that door open, it can't be closed. Right. And absolutely.
All right, Stacy, thanks for having me.
Thank you, Rick. Have a great rest of the virtual online Seattle Hempfest event.
I'm gonna.
All right. Thank you.